Hello, everybody. Okay, so if you're watching this in a subsequent semester, just kind of ignore the things I'm going to mention here at the beginning. I am re-recording for those in the summer 2013 semester. We've been having some problems, as many of you know, with the Integrity video recording system, so I am trying an alternative service. And if in future semesters, if you're watching this, be thankful that you didn't have to experience the problems and the warping sounds and the warping video that the students at the very beginning of the summer 2013 semester had to encounter. All right, so I'm going to, what we're doing here in Unit 1, the first part of Biology 201, your anatomy and physiology class. You've already seen some anatomy video clips discussing things like body cavities and the serous membranes that line and cover organs in some of those body cavities, and you've been over the body region terms. And so the rest of the anatomy for Unit 1, which is pretty extensive, we're going to go over some very basic anatomical features, major organs, and so forth, things that you need to know to proceed forward in the course from here. And for most of the anatomy in this class, I am going to use a 3D anatomy model called Visible Body. And you are more than welcome to purchase that and download it on whatever device you have. They have versions of this for PCs, Macintoshes, Android devices, iPhones, iPads. Pretty extensive, and it's a great product. It costs about $40 to purchase it. You do have to purchase separate copies if you want it on more than one device. But it would probably serve you well in Biology 201 and 202. I think it's a great resource to have, and even forward from there. On Blackboard, I have linked alternative 3D anatomy resources that you can use. And these are great because you can zoom in on different body parts, you can highlight different body systems. They really help you see how all the different organs and structures are integrated with each other and where they're located relative to other things. And the free ones that you can use that I have linked, they are good. They're going to be a little different from the one that I'm using, but you can accomplish a lot of the same things for free. Just be aware that there are going to be some differences from one to the other. And if you purchase something like Visible Body, you're going to get more detail and more information provided within the program. And hopefully you'll get a lot out. I'm hoping this will work out well. I think it's better for students who are working at home to have a 3D model like this than to just try to study anatomy from photographs and images. It makes it, there are a lot of things you just can't appreciate in 2 dimensions like that, in a 2-dimensional image or photograph, compared to something that's more of a 3D visual that you can actually rotate like this. All right, so if you are using Visible Body, you can actually launch a female anatomical model or a male. I'll go ahead and do a female this time. And let me go, all right, let me come back in here. And if you look over here, if you're using this over on the side, they've got different blue tabs for different body systems as you study different parts of the human body. And what I'm going to do for these videos is I have some views saved for you guys already that I'm going to use for this first part. So if you're going along with the anatomy list that I have provided to you. Okay, I had a brief little pause there for a second. I've got some saved views here that I'm going to use. If you explore around in one of these programs, it's kind of fun to do. Probe around and see some of the different anatomical structures. So we're going to start off, if you're using your anatomy study guide for Unit 1, I'm going to start off here with the dorsal cavity. So we're going to talk about the anatomical features you need to know here in Unit 1 from that cavity. And if you guys remember from your other lecture, the dorsal cavity is an internal space that includes the cranial cavity, where the brain is located. And then also, if we kind of zoom out here, you've got I'll have to strip off some muscles here so that we can see it, but you've got that space running on the inside of all of your vertebral bones where your spinal cord is located. And those two things are connected to each other, and together they make up your dorsal cavity, which is on the back side, posterior or dorsal side of the body. All right, so brain. You know, brain is not too hard. Let me just kind of show you some of the things you can do here with visible body. You can actually dissect off. So we've actually got the muscles located on here. So I'm going to hide those, and I can multiple select different things at once. So it's kind of cool because you can dissect off different layers. And so now we're seeing the skull bones underneath. We're going to learn a whole lot more about the skull bones when we get to Unit 3, but I can highlight those. Got some other muscles here. The yellow fibers you see there are nerves. Can hide those, and then hey, there's our brain. I imagine most of you guys know where the brain is located. That wouldn't be too hard to identify. So there it is, and you can kind of see it relative to the other structures there on the head, and it does give you a pretty good feel for how much space the brain occupies. And you know, notice, okay, so the brain sits in the cranial cavity, and if we kind of zoom in here pretty tightly, you know, we've cut open one of the skull bones there, and here's the brain. There's not a lot of space between the two, and you know, we'll hear more about that or learn more about that as we move through these courses. All right, I'm going to switch views because I've got a view over here where we've now taken the brain out of the skull. So that's one of the nice things with a lot of these programs too. You can isolate different parts of the body, rotate them around. It really gives you a nice perspective. I think in a lot of ways these computer-based 3D anatomy products are better than the laboratory models we use for our traditional classes. All right, so there's the brain, and then if the brain is outside of the body, this is actually the anterior part of the brain over here. Let me bring up my pen. Anterior part of the brain over here, posterior section over here. So we're actually looking at a right lateral view of the brain. And now I'm going to rotate the brain up this way. So we're going to look at the underside of the brain and kind of zoom in here. Bring my pen back up. If you see this little bean-like structure there, that is the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland, very small. You're going to hear a whole lot about the pituitary gland when you take Biology 202. It is considered to be the master gland of the body because it makes so many hormones that control many different bodily processes. And in fact, it's so important you might think it would be a lot bigger than it is, but it's actually just a little tiny bean-shaped structure there, and it's in the medial inferior portion of the brain. There on the underside. Okay. And while we're in this view, let me point out some other things. So right here, do you see these little yellow structures there? And then these nerves that are branching off of the brain, all of those. And this is actually, right in here, you might think that that's the spinal cord. That is actually the brain stem, which is going to connect to the spinal cord, which is inferior to it after you leave the skull and move down into the vertebral cavity. So that is actually part of the brain itself there, the brain stem. So you've got all these nerves that are extending off of the brain and the brain stem, and those extend to places like the face, the neck, the tongue, the back of the throat. There are a couple of them that actually extend, believe it or not, all the way from the brain all the way down into the abdominopelvic cavity. You'll learn about those at the end of the semester. But as a group, these are called our cranial nerves. So cranial nerves are just these nerves that extend, these nerve fibers that extend off of the brain or the brain stem. All right, let me get out of my pen mode here. Let me kind of rotate this around so you can see some other views there of these cranial nerves. So they're pretty extensive. And then you can see some other views there of our little brown beanish shaped pituitary gland. All right, now how about our spinal nerves? And I'm going to bring up a whole human body here. Okay, so this view of the body, Obviously everything has been stripped off except for the nervous system, so all the yellow fibers you are seeing there are nerves that extend out to various parts of the body, and obviously our skeletal system is still here in place. And I'm zooming in on part of our spinal column or vertebral column here, and the vertebrae, your vertebral bones there, have been faded, and I'm going to go ahead and select several of those so that we can actually dissect them off. And I'm also going to dissect off kind of in light purple there. That is a covering that you have around the spinal cord that we'll learn about later. And let me get rid of some of those. Those are some ligaments there between your vertebrae. And so now we've exposed the spinal cord. So this big yellow structure that you see there, that's the spinal cord. That's probably not going to be too hard to remember. But then notice how you also have these nerve fibers here that are extending off of the spinal cord. Those are, as a group, called your spinal nerves. Okay, so the difference between your spinal nerves and your cranial nerves is the spinal nerves extend off of the spinal cord, cranial nerves extend off of the brain or the brainstem. And that's really all there is to. That's it for the first little video clip here I'm going to do using visible body, and I will move on to the next section. I'm going to do the head and the neck next if you're following along with the items there in the study guide.